There we go. Hello and welcome to Peston on Sunday. Coming up, how do you like your Brexit, hard or soft? I'll be asking David Davis, who's in charge of us leaving the EU, at least till the election. Now, we know she wants a soft Brexit, Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, and I'll ask what next for Scotland if she doesn't get her way. And with the world facing the worst cyber attack ever, Europe's top cop, Rob Wainwright, will tell me whether there's more we can do to protect ourselves. Also, I'll be munching on croissants and chewing over manifesto leaks with my political chums, Labour's Shadow Health Secretary John Ashworth and the Tory MP and author Nadine Dorries. Hello to you both. Watcher. Now, when his draft manifesto was leaked, was that a brilliant and cunning plan or a shambles on steroids? Of course, she said it showed he wasn't strong and stable enough. Oh, no one saw that coming. But it achieved something he and his shadow chancellor have failed to do for months. That's get everyone talking about their policies, which are, surprise, to spend a colossal amount more on public services, do a bit of nationalisation, put up taxes for the rich and transfer power to trade unions. However, in France, it was vive la différence when they elected a president rather more in the mould of a past Labour leader than the current one. Now, here is our country's future. It's Xanthi, newly arrived daughter of our very own Allegra. Anushka Skrini, all together now. Isn't she lovely?
She is gorgeous. Congratulations, Allegra. Hopefully you are not worrying too much about that NHS cyber attack that is on the front of a number of newspapers, including the Sunday Telegraph. And they have a Labour policy here, a £26 billion tax on city deals. Now, let me show you the Sunday Times as well, because they have two massive interviews. Harry Styles thinks Brexit is going in the wrong direction. Harry, if you're out there, why don't you comment on our David Davis interview later? Another interview with Theresa May. Apparently, she is the Ron Seal Prime Minister, does what it says on the tin, and the tin today says a council house revolution. It's a bit Maggie Thatcher in terms of right to buy, but it also sounds a little bit Jeremy Corbyn. And I must tell you, there have been a flurry of bets on the idea of Prime Minister Corbyn this week. Could it be that leaked Labour manifesto? Now, critics say it is a 1970s throwback, but look how popular some of these policies are. This is abolishing tuition fees. These are those nationalisations. Both of them have the support of almost half of people. Far fewer think it is going in the wrong direction, and raising the money. 58% of people very relaxed about slapping more tax on those earning over 80 grand. But it is not all a bed of roses for Labour. Raising taxes on businesses, not so popular. And the idea of not leaving the EU if there is no trade deal, people are saying no thanks. Robert.
Well, I'm delighted now to be joined by the Conservative MP Nadine Dorries and Labour's Shadow Health Secretary John Ashworth. I want to start with this extraordinary cyber attack on companies and public services all over the world, but it's been a particular problem for the NHS, Nadine. Now, the vulnerability is to do with the fact that many hospitals are still running a software programme that was introduced in 2001. Now, you know, you've been in power since 2010. This is your failure, isn't it?
Well, no, not at all, because we've invested £1.9 billion in enhanced cyber security. We've put the money in.
So why hasn't it been used to protect this vital service?
Well, I think one of the problems is that Microsoft themselves were almost holding companies to ransom by demanding this £5 billion to enhance these particular services, and the patch to increase this, the Windows XP to the new operating system. But, you know, we've put the money in. There's GCHQ is a world leader in cybersecurity. We've done what we could. Individual health trust had a responsibility to upgrade their systems. But, you know, you're quite right. The count this morning is 156 countries, 156 major organised countries with major organisations, health services. This just isn't an attack on the NHS and the UK, which is kind of how it's being portrayed. This is a big problem worldwide this morning.
It's obviously a worldwide problem, but, you know, the public service which has suffered worst, I think, globally is the NHS. John, Is Nadine right that this is all Microsoft's fault?
No, I think the government have been rather complacent when people have warned about a cybersecurity attack on the NHS. So I would say to the government today, publish the Department of Health's risk register so we'll know how seriously the government were taking potential cyber attack risks. If the Conservative Prime Minister thinks they were taking it seriously, then she shouldn't have any problem in publishing that register. But more generally, I'm afraid we've seen huge investment cuts in the infrastructure of the NHS. In the last year, £1 billion taken out of infrastructure in order to plug wider gaps in the NHS. So what I'm saying today is that a Labour government will put £10 billion into the infrastructure needs of the NHS, and a big priority of that will go to investing in cybersecurity and upgrading our IT.
Why would people trust you? Why would people trust you when your government wasted £10 billion on a failed NHS IT service?
Well, with respect...
Why would they trust you to do that?
With respect, you can either invest in the NHS or you can cut the NHS next year, which is the Conservative Party's policy.
Well, look, there's so much more to pick up on with the two of you later. Plenty of opportunity to chat, but now I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by the Brexit Secretary, David Davis. Very good to see you. And I think we'll come back to some of those election issues a bit later, but I do want to start actually by looking essentially at your brief, because it is right at the centre of why the Prime Minister said she wanted a general election. Now, her main argument for a general election was she said that she needed a bigger majority to strengthen her hand in negotiations with the rest of the EU on our exit terms. But whenever I talk to EU leaders or officials, they say that's absolute nonsense. They can't see any way in which, they're going to somehow be more amenable depending on the size of her majority.
To quote my namesake, Maddie Rice-Davis, they would say that, wouldn't they? They're on the other side of a negotiation. Look, the first thing is, Brexit is the defining issue of the age in some respects. It's underpinning. You've got a successful Brexit, gives you the basis for a successful economic strategy, gives you the basis for paying for public services, funding the sorts of things that we've just been talking about. Now, in the last 9 months, we have taken through the House of Commons the Article 50 bill. In the course of that, the standard debate was, you've got a mandate to leave the European Union. Well, we, who can't quite cope with this argument, have accepted that there's been a referendum, but you haven't got a mandate to leave in that way. You can leave the European Union, but you can't leave the single market, or you can't leave the customs union, or other impractical proposals. What this is doing is creating a mandate for the way we do it. Not just that we're going to leave, but we're going to leave on these terms.
And so just to be clear, in this hard, soft distinction that people make, this is a mandate for a hard Brexit.
Well, I just think hard Brexit and soft Brexit are propaganda terms. It's very plain.
But it is not membership of the single market. It is out of the customs union. But it is no role for the European Court of Justice. It's control over immigration.
All of that.
This is for you the big platform of your party.
But that's what the public voted for. They knew both sides in the referendum. I don't want to go over the referendum campaign again, thank you. But both sides said if we leave, we have to leave the single market. Both Cameron and Osborne on one side, Gove and Johnson on the other, both said that on television and other places. So that's the first thing. Now, no, it's important. It's important, if I may, Robert, to square this particular circle, because they say, oh well, that's what cutting ourselves off. No, it's not. What we're seeking is a comprehensive free trade agreement with the European Union, covering all products and all services. What we're seeking is a customs agreement to go with that, to make free and frictionless trade. Now, what we're aiming to get, in other words, is the most beneficial economic outcome we can, whilst actually respecting the outcome of the referendum. Which is why I say hard and soft doesn't actually capture the...
OK, listen, I don't want to get bogged down on terminology, but there is a perfectly plausible argument that says when you're in a negotiation and you're pressing for the most favourable trade terms possible, actually your hand is strengthened if you say to the people on the other side of the negotiation, look, unless you give a bit more, I'm just not going to be able to get this through my own parliament. And you want a deal, we both want a deal, give a bit more ground. So curiously, you could argue that a smaller majority reinforces her negotiation position.
No, it doesn't, I'm afraid. One of the issues that we had to deal with in this last 9 months is you've got not a large number, but a significant number of people who say they accept the referendum, but actually try every turn to tie the hands of the negotiators. The argument about whether a bad deal is better or worse than no deal. We argue, a bad deal can be significantly worse than no deal. Yeah. So that taking away that option of having a no deal outcome is actually quite a serious undermining of the negotiating capability. Nobody wants no deal. Nobody wants it, but you've got to have the option. You go buy a house and you walk in and you say, I'm going to buy this house, whatever. You're going to pay a very large price for it. Ditto car, ditto anything else. Any negotiation, you have to have the other option, the other alternative. And one of the things that a number of people tried to do during the course of the last few months is to take that away. Now, what we're saying to the public is every vote for a Conservative candidate is a vote to reinforce Theresa May's hand. Now, you're right in one respect. Some of the Europeans thought, a bigger majority means they can give more away to us. No, not at all. A big majority means we've got a stronger hand and get a better deal.
Well, I think, many are going to dispute that, but let's just get on to the process. So, talking to EU officials the other day, they say that the next big event in terms of the negotiation will be a meeting either with you or whoever, if Labour wins, their Brexit secretary.
And if I'm not sacked, all right.
Well, if you're not sacked. But anyway, on the assumption you're still in the job, they say the next big event will be a meeting between you and Michel Barnier, their main negotiator, at the end of June. Yeah. And that will be a conversation about the mandate they've published for how these talks will go. So do you accept the structure that they put on these talks broadly, that you have to talk about money, migrants and Ireland before you get on to trade?
Not entirely, and that'll be the first discussion.
So which bit of that don't you accept?
Well, money and Ireland, basically. I mean, the European Union citizens in the UK, British citizens abroad, we all accept needs to be dealt with as fast as possible.
And can I just ask, they think that this could be all wrapped up by the early autumn on the rights of citizens. Yeah. Do you think it could all be wrapped up?
Yes.
Because they have laid out that they want to guarantee all rights, pension rights, health rights and all the rest of it, which is what people were saying in the Leave campaign. Yes. So that could be wrapped up quite quickly.
I think so. I mean, there will be arguments over fine detail.
Like what?
Well, like whether the European Court of Justice oversees these rights after we've left.
Is that a fine detail? Because talking again to Brussels officials, they say the European Court of Justice has to oversee those rights.
We'll have an argument about that.
Are you prepared to accept that at all?
No, we're not. And the simple truth is we're leaving. We are going to be outside the reach of the European Court. We're going to be outside the reach of all of the lawmaking capability.
So just to be clear, if an Italian who's lived here for a bit has a dispute over the pension that we pay him, you don't want the European Court of Justice to be able to adjudicate?
No, I don't think there will be such a dispute, to be honest. What we're after is a very generous outcome. In effect, what we're trying to do is to get a circumstance which effectively freezes the rights that people already have. So they will have the rights to welfare, they'll have the rights to healthcare, they'll have the rights to pensions, as they would if they were a permanent resident here. Anyway, the only rights they wouldn't have are those sort of citizenship rights and the right to vote in a general election.
So that's one important disagreement. Sorry,
but the point is that there are many, many ways of guaranteeing this. We don't see a need to sort of give in to the European ideology on the European Court of Justice. We've got very good courts. In fact, I take slight offence to the argument that the Supreme Court couldn't oversee this. So that's stage one.
OK, there's an enormous amount that I need to pick up with you on all of this in just a minute, because now we're just going to a quick break, but there'll be more from David Davis in just a minute or two. Welcome back to Peston on Sunday. Big fail for David Davis, who's not yet negotiated his exit from the show. Now, first, Anushka, there's a bit of reaction on Twitter, I think.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, as you can imagine, Twitter is alive, and not all of it that kind. Here is academic Paul Hutchings saying, oh, is that the right one? We can sort things out quickly except for the fine detail. Yes, those are commonly known as the hard bits and where the devil is found. And
we agree with that.
Politico's Tom McTague, who knows a thing or two about Brussels, says David Davis jokes about being sacked after the election. It seems bizarre from London, but in Brussels, it is a perpetual rumour.
Well,
there you
actually,
go, wishful thinking.
Well, I might pick up, though, on that with you before we get on to the meat of it. I mean, you did say, I think, to the Telegraph quite recently that you thought there was a bit of a Brussels conspiracy to get you sacked.
I wouldn't put it as conspiracy. Don't overstate it. When the
talk about the leak, aren't we?
Yeah, that leak was designed to be as disruptive as it could be. And it wasn't a leak; it was a briefing, you know, and it was designed to be as disruptive in all sorts of ways. I mean, they also said,
why did you though mention in that dinner, you know, the fact that you duffed up Theresa May at the ECJ?
That's the part which wasn't accurate. I mean, she teases me all the time about this, but that's by the by. But you know, it wasn't a leak; it was a briefing, and it was a briefing, much of which was just completely wrong. You know. So anyway, and it was aimed to disrupt.
Well, look, let's get on to the hard facts, which is, you know, you are going to have to talk to Michel Barnier about his proposals for how we do the negotiation, and you've already said that you don't accept that money has to be. He says the formula for how much we pay them has to be decided before we get on to trade talks, and you're saying you're having none of that. Is that right?
Well, what we've said is Article 50 says that, you know, you'll decide what is now called the divorce arrangement, but you know, the separation, taking into account the ongoing relationship. Well, how can you take into account an ongoing relationship which doesn't exist yet? So, and we take the view we've got this big, very ambitious free trade agreement we want to undertake. We want to get on with that as soon as possible. Not to hang around while, you know, because what happens then? That becomes pressure on us. The negotiating pressure is on us. This is why it's designed this way, to get over the most difficult bit, the funding and Northern Ireland, before we do anything else. And Northern Ireland, by the way, how on earth do you resolve the border, the issue of the border with Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, unless you know what our general borders policy is, what the customs agreement is, what the free trade agreement is, whether you need to charge tariffs at the border or not? You can't decide one without the other. It's wholly illogical, and we happen to think are the wrong interpretation of the treaty. So that'll be the row of the summer. That'll be
I mean, it's obviously a very big row. And the thing that I think must cause at least your officials some anxiety is that if the Council of Ministers agree the mandate in just a couple of weeks' time that Barnier has put before them, they would then have to have another meeting in the autumn to agree your sequencing, all of which uses up enormously valuable time, which makes many people very uncomfortable with the idea that we're going to have a deal of any sort over the 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things to say first. I mean, there's a lot of nonsense talked about the trade deal itself, how long it takes. I mean, Karel de Gucht, past trade commissioner, really hates Brexit, but says, you know, this can be done in the time if the political will is there. The current one, Malmström, also hates Brexit. The current
but just to be clear, you're not anxious about those extra months being used up by this row over the summer, which you say is inevitable.
No, well, for a start, if they wanted to, they could have another council. Before the summer starts.
Right.
Secondly, the summer is the least valuable time in dealing with Brussels. It's nearly empty and it's very, very slow moving. It doesn't mean we have to be. We can do lots and lots of work in that time. So, you know, we're very conscious of the time sequencing of this. We're also very conscious of how they'll use that time sequence to pressure us, and we'll avoid that at every turn.
I mean, just finally, they do say that the reason they want the formula for money settled first, and this is, I think, relevant to the strength of our negotiating hand, is they say that they do not believe even a country you think is our friends, the Poles, for example, would be prepared to talk about trade until they know what kind of money is available to them for infrastructure projects that they're currently working on based on money coming from us.
What happened in the last 9 months is Michel Barnier went around all the 27, talked to them all, and basically tried to get them to exercise solidarity, as they term it, to operate together. Pretty much all of them have a common view on money. Either they receive money and they want to keep receiving it, or they pay money and they don't want to pay any more, right? And our removal from the formula makes all of that more difficult. So there's no surprise that that's what they want to do. But the raw truth is that, you know, we want to see the whole deal together. They love saying nothing is agreed until everything's agreed. That's our view on this, with the single exception of the detail of the of European citizens and British citizens outside their own countries. With the single exception of that, we want to see everything packaged up together, and that's what we're going to do.
Well, great to see you. Thanks so much for coming on. Commiserations that you're going to have a pretty difficult time over the summer, so it seems. Anyway, see you again soon. So there we had, I thought, absolutely fascinating disclosures from the current Brexit Secretary, David Davis, who has made it absolutely clear that we're simply not going to accept the structure for these talks, which the rest of the European Union has said they want. So we are heading for an almighty row very soon, aren't we?
Well, I think it was David who taught me this, that legally we have no liabilities and no assets in the EU, and therefore they have no basis on which to make these demands, these financial demands for this divorce bill. And I think it's very important that that is sorted out fundamentally before we move on into the negotiations. You know, it's a bit of a minefield otherwise if we've got this hanging over us. It's an ever-moving, I think it was 50 billion at one point, it's moved to 100 billion. It has to be sorted. They have to know and understand the basis on which we're going to move forward. And I think if they've thrown this down, this gauntlet down, it has to be dealt with.
Now, what David Davis had to say was perfectly clear. The critique made of Labour is nobody really understands what your position is on any of this.
Well, I mean, we want the very best deal for the United Kingdom in Brexit.
Is he right, therefore, that we should not be agreeing how much we pay them before we get on to trade talks? Is that the right approach?
Well, I mean, we've obviously got to go into these negotiations and we've got to be clever with the cards that we play. So I understand why he's saying that. But I thought the most revealing comment throughout that very interesting interview from David was his political answer to you when you quite unreasonably asked him, why does a thumping great Tory landslide strengthen our negotiating hand? And he actually didn't give a convincing answer to that, because the reality is, if the Tories get a big landslide, and let's be frank, lots of Tory candidates think there is going to be a big Tory landslide, there's no explanation. There's no explanation as to why that's in the national interest. There's explanations as to why it's in the Tory party's interest, but there's no explanation as to why, in a negotiation in Europe, that is particularly in the national interest. Because, as you say, Theresa May will be able to get whatever she wants through Parliament. Actually, she won't be able to. She can ignore you and your sort of friends on the backbenches as well.
Again, we're just about to crash into our adverts, but I should probably point out to you that also your deputy leader seems to think that there may well be a thumping Tory majority. It's not just Tories. Anyway, don't go away after the break. We'll be joined in just a moment by Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. Welcome back. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola, obviously it is a joy to have you here, but since you haven't got any pretensions yourself to be Prime Minister of the whole of the United Kingdom, why are you so visible in this campaign, you know, taking part in things like the leaders' events and all that kind of stuff?
Well, the SNP for the last 2 years has been the third biggest party in the House of Commons, so it's absolutely right and proper that our voice is heard in this campaign. But I think it's really important when you think about the dynamic of this election in England. It looks as if Theresa May is on course to win with a bigger majority because of the meltdown in the Labour Party. In fact, she called this election to strengthen her hand, in her own words. And that makes it all the more important that there are strong voices of opposition in the House of Commons after this election, so that we don't have an unfettered, out-of-control Tory government able to do whatever it wants on Brexit, on austerity, on public services. So from a Scottish point of view, the only way to make sure there are strong voices standing up for Scotland, making our voice heard and protecting our interests is to vote SNP and send SNP MPs to the House of Commons. So
that is obviously seen by the Tories as a sign that you're absolutely up for coalitions with Labour and the Lib Dems.
In the last general election...
And they should be straightforward about that.
Look, in the last general election, I was very straightforward about that. The polls suggested, it turned out they were wrong, but they suggested that a hung parliament might be on the cards. And I was very clear then that if the arithmetic lent itself to a progressive coalition, I would want the SNP to be part of that. this election is different in the sense that the polls don't suggest there is going to be a hung parliament. So unless the polls are getting it very, very, very wrong, the arithmetic in the next House of Commons is not going to lend itself to that. What looks more likely is that we will have a strengthened Tory government on the back of a bigger majority in England. So my point is that the dynamic and the important thing in this election is to make sure there is a strong opposition holding that Tory government to account. There are massive challenges for the whole of the UK in the next few years, not just Brexit, but the possibility of an extreme, perhaps chaotic Brexit. There is the question of what happens with austerity. I've got a very different view on that to Theresa May. So these things have really big implications for our public services. So my message is, if you don't want the Tories just to have a free hand to do what they want, if you're in Scotland, make sure you send strong Scottish voices. Tory MPs from Scotland will be rubber stamps for Theresa May. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But just as we've seen in the last couple of years, Angus Robertson, as leader of the SNP group, providing week after week the only really effective opposition to the Tories, then this election gives us the chance to ensure Scotland's voice is not silenced, our Parliament is not undermined. We have those strong voices.
Now, you're a left of centre party. Do you like what you've seen of Labour's manifesto?
Well, it's been really interesting. I know we haven't been supposed to have seen Labour's manifesto thus far.
We've seen quite a lot of it.
We've seen all of it, I think. It's been really interesting because if I look at some of the key policies that Labour is putting forward, free tuition for university students, scrapping hospital car parking, ambitious targets around renewable generation and climate change, free school meals. Today, even with the Tories council house building, these are all policies that the SNP government in Scotland has already
So to be clear, if there was an
introduced.
opportunity for a deal with Labour to
There's not
govern, you'd
going
do it.
to be, look, Jeremy Corbyn's not going to win this election. He's not going to be Prime Minister. I don't think he's going to get within a million miles of number 10. And I'm not saying that in any sort of opinion sense. I'm saying that as a statement of fact, unless the polls are more wildly wrong than they've ever been before. So I'm trying to deal with reality. But the point about Labour's policies is, it's very clear from Labour's manifesto that the SNP has been leading the way in terms of progressive policies in the UK. And, let's make sure we can continue that. We don't have a Tory government that's able to drag Scotland backwards. Let's keep being champions of progressive policies with MPs in the House of Commons that can do that. The biggest risk, in my view, from this election is a Tory government that literally has a blank cheque and a free hand. And if you look at what's going to be the opposition, Labour, Labour's in a sorry state, but does anybody think that after this election they're not going to descend into an even sorrier state as they fight with each other? The only opposition will be the SNP. So
a couple of points on this. You do now have the power to set income tax bands, income tax rates. They've proposed a new rate of tax for those earning £80,000 or more, tax on richer people. Would you do that in Scotland?
Well, we've just set income tax rates in Scotland for this year, so we've made no change to the basic rate of income tax.
What about in the future, though?
Can I just,
do you think, is it a good idea?
Can I just set out our position first properly? We've not changed the basic rate because we think at a time of rising living standards that would be wrong. We've not raised the higher rate as well, but we decided not to give a cut to higher rate taxpayers.
I know, you didn't raise the threshold.
So we didn't raise the threshold because that really speaks to our priorities of investment in public services and helping the vulnerable.
Slightly better off people paid a bit more.
Well, they don't pay more than they pay just now. They're just not getting a tax cut, and that speaks to our priorities.
More than
in terms of, we, at the 2015 election, said that we would support a 50p top additional rate of tax. We haven't done that in Scotland alone because we don't, although we control the tax rates in Scotland, we don't control measures to get rid of or tackle tax avoidance, so to avoid people switching their income into capital gains.
So is that off the agenda then?
We haven't done that in Scotland alone, although we keep it under review. I do think there is an argument for that UK-wide. Now, I haven't published my manifesto yet, touch wood, it hasn't been leaked yet. We'll put forward our policies there, but I think there's still a case for that UK-wide at a time when our public services are under so much pressure and we see poverty rates rising because of the Tory welfare agenda.
Forgive me, you haven't answered the question now on putting up the tax for those on 80,000 or more.
That's not my policy. And
so you're against it?
Well, it's not a policy I've put forward in Scotland, and we control, as you said, tax rates in Scotland. So
as somebody who's famously supposed to be straight talking, you haven't
by
really
definition, if it's not my policy, I don't support it.
Okay.
But we will set tax rates every year in Scotland, and we'll consider the balance of that. You know, tax rates are obviously important in terms of raising revenue, but we've also got to look at the economy and what we need to do to grow our economy as well. So we'll take balanced decisions on tax, but we'll take them in our own budgetary cycle because we now control income tax rates.
Now, one of the critiques of you in government, made, for example, by the respected OECD, is that standards in schools have declined. What's gone wrong?
Well, let me address that point directly. I'm not trying to dodge it, but let me just put a bit of context around it. We've introduced a new school curriculum which has been praised by the OECD. We have record numbers... But
you accept that standards have gone down?
I'll come on to this specific point, but we have record numbers of young people leaving school with higher passes, advanced higher passes, going into university, training or employment. So on many measures, Scottish education is doing well and improving. We have a particular challenge as we've introduced this new curriculum around the teaching of literacy and numeracy, and we're putting a lot of effort. We've got a programme of reform in education designed to tackle that, but also accelerate progress in terms of closing the attainment gap, the gap between the richest and the poorest young people. And we're backing all of that with greater transparency.
Do you think you took your eye off the ball initially?
No, I don't. Over the past few years, we've been introducing this new curriculum. But I've been very upfront about my determination to tackle the areas where, to be very frank about it, I don't think we're doing as well as we should be doing. So we have a new attainment challenge. We're putting more resources directly to school. So I know the debate in England is about falling school budgets. We are increasing the resources going to schools and giving head teachers much greater autonomy about how that money is spent.
I've got lots more to ask you. You'll be sad to hear. But first, Anushka's got one or two things to say.
Thank you. Well, there has been no love lost these days between our guest and the Prime Minister, Theresa May, and yet it started off so well. This was their first official meeting, and Nicola Sturgeon tweeted that this picture might make girls everywhere feel like nothing is off limits. They were probably quite inspired by this picture too. Another historic meeting between the two most powerful women in Britain, although the Daily Mail decided to use it to wind up us feminists by saying it was a battle of Legsit. Well, here we are not interested in pins, we are interested in politics. So let's compare that. Number one, mandate. Nicola Sturgeon has led her party into national polls in Scotland, and she won 1 million votes in 2016. Theresa May, as Tory leader, hasn't gone to the whole country quite yet. So for now, it is a mandate in Maidenhead, 35,000. She'll be hoping to do better than that on June the 8th. But for now, Nicola can boast, my mandate is better than yours. Not so when it comes to the UK-wide personal approval rating. Theresa May in the positive, a +10, perhaps an election bounce. Across the UK, Nicola, I'm afraid it is -36, although I imagine this is the number that she will be interested in, +11 when you just look at Scotland. Now, this week, the Prime Minister talked about jobs for the girls and jobs for the boys. And we learned that in the May household, she does the cooking and he takes out the bins, although he did also point out that she also runs the country. And so I must ask, Nicola, in your household, what are the jobs for the girls?
Oh, I'm afraid in my household, my husband does all the cooking and most of the domestic tax. I got on with the girl job of running the country.
Oh, nice answer.
Do you recognise that distinction between...
No, I don't want to get into a sort of ding-dong with the Prime Minister here, but I think it's really important. We're all trying to break down gender stereotypes. And, you know, I've spent a lot of time, and I know Theresa May will agree with this, and saying to girls, there's nothing off limits. You should aspire to whatever you want to do.
I think you agree on all that, don't you? That
I hope so, but
limit.
I think we've got to be careful we don't then just play into these gender stereotypes. But I hope we would agree that we should encourage all young girls to think they can run the country, they can be brain surgeons, they can do absolutely anything they want, and that, I think, is really important.
Now, where you don't agree...
on many things.
Well, there are a few things,
Fair
but
to
you,
say.
I'm delighted to say, are joining us here at ITV on Thursday for our Leaders' Debate.
Yes.
The Prime Minister is not joining us, or at least she's so far said she's not joining us. Why do you think she doesn't want to participate in this head-to-head with you and the other party leaders?
Well, it kind of looks, if I can use a Scottish word, it kind of looks as if she's feared, which means frightened of the scrutiny. You know, I think doing TV appearances like the One Show is all perfectly legitimate, but not as a substitute for the hard questions and the hard scrutiny. So I'll be delighted to put myself into that debate on Thursday. Theresa May seems to want to go through this election dodging the public, dodging any real questions. You know, there's been reports that the media have to submit their questions in advance. So I'll challenge her today. You know, change your mind, come and join us on Thursday. I'd say the same to Jeremy Corbyn, and let's have a proper debate where we all put forward our policies, but we all are subject to scrutiny and hard questions as well.
Yeah. I mean, as it happens, there may be other journalists who are asked to tell them what the... I mean, I've never been asked by any...
Sure, I'm only going
Theresa
on
May
the
or anybody
reports,
to talk about my questions in advance, and of course I never would.
You certainly didn't agree to do it for me today. Not that I would have
You very
asked
sensibly didn't ask. Because you don't want to know what I say when people ask. Now, if I could, however, ask you on this whole issue of a second independence referendum, some people think that this vote that we're about to see on June the 8th will be a vote by the Scottish people on whether they want a second independence referendum. How do you see it?
Well, firstly, the vote on June the 8th will not decide whether Scotland becomes independent or not. Yes, there's the issue of who should be in charge of Scotland's future. Should it be the Scottish people and the Scottish Parliament or a Westminster government? My position is quite straightforward. At the end of the Brexit process, and I stress that, not now, but at the end of the process, when we know the terms of Brexit, I think Scotland should have a choice about our future. You know, the Tory position appears to be UK-wide. It doesn't matter how bad the Brexit talks go, people just have to like it or lump it. I don't think that's right. I think we should have a choice over our future. But actually, in this election, there's a much more immediate opportunity for Scotland, and that is to make sure our voice is heard in these Brexit negotiations, because, you know, I think see real risks now, not just of Brexit, but of an extreme or chaotic Brexit. I caught some of what David Davis was saying earlier on, and that would be really damaging to the economy. It would sacrifice a lot of jobs. Now, the Scottish Government put forward proposals just at the tail end of last year that accepted we'd leave the EU, but wanted to protect our place in the single market. Theresa May dismissed them out of hand. So my message in this election to voters in Scotland, you can give some democratic legitimacy to those proposals to try to protect our place in the single market. And whether you voted Leave or Remain or yes or no in 2014, if you vote for me and for the SNP, you strengthen my hand in making sure Scotland's voice is heard.
Just very briefly, because unfortunately we are out of time, but can I therefore just, though, be clear, if you get fewer seats, fewer votes than you did last time in this June the 8th election, is that a blow to your hopes of a second independence?
We're fighting every constituency to win, but, you know, elections are judged by who wins. So the question is who will win the election in Scotland. Now, I take nothing for granted, but I'm campaigning to win the election in Scotland. And traditionally, in any democracy, it's the party that wins that has the endorsement for its position.
Lovely to see you again, and we'll doubtless talk more before June the 8th. Thanks to the First Minister, and you can hear more from her in our Leaders' Debate this coming Thursday at 8 o'clock on ITV. Don't go away, because after the break, we'll have Europe's top cop, the director of Europol, Rob Wainwright, and he'll tell us how, if we can fight back in this dreadful cyber war. Welcome back to Peston on Sunday. I'm delighted to be joined by the director of Europol, Rob Wainwright. Rob, it's your job to protect us, along with some others, from the kind of cyber attacks we've seen. Really worrying to British people, because in particular the blow to the way that hospitals operate. How serious has this attack been?
Well, at Europol, you know, we are running around 200 global operations against cybercrime each year, but we've never seen anything like this. We've seen the rise of ransomware becoming the principal cyber threat, I think. But this is something we haven't seen before. The global reach is unprecedented.
How many countries now?
The latest count is over 200,000 victims in at least 150 countries. You know, and those victims, many of those will be businesses, including large corporations, like we've seen FedEx in America, Telefonica.
And these are just different institutions?
Many different institutions, you know, so this is certainly not a UK-only problem. It's an international problem. It has...
Our health service, parts of it, not all obviously, were brought to their knees for a bit. Is this more private sector or public sector? Who's been targeted more across the world?
Well, it's a pretty indiscriminate attack, actually. So it's hit right across the private and public sector, the Russian Ministry of Interior, but large parts of our public services, the rail network in Germany, for example, the telecoms operator in Spain, one of the largest car manufacturers in France. Indiscriminate in nature, fast spreading. What is unique about this particular problem is the ransomware itself is used in combination with a worm functionality. So the infection of one computer automatically seems to spread it through the network, and that's why it's so fast spreading.
And is it from somebody, just one person in an organisation, clicking on an email they shouldn't click on? Is that how it gets in?
Well, we don't know. We've got our cybercrime task force running now in Europol, working with the NCA, working with the FBI to try and find that out. It's unlikely to be just one person, I think. You know, there's cybercrime syndicates that are profiting from this around the world.
It's how does it get into the... What is the door into the institution, as it were? Does it just take one person to open the wrong attachment on an email, and that then infects the organisation, if you see what I mean?
Yes, very often the so-called phishing attacks by clicking on the wrong email. But what is happening here, actually, is the exploitation of a flaw in the Microsoft operating systems, as most of your viewers know.
Yeah.
And it's only infecting those computers that are not patched, that are not sufficiently up to date. So
how worried are you that the NHS didn't put in place these patches?
Well, I think we have been concerned for some time that the healthcare sector in many countries are particularly vulnerable. They're processing a lot of sensitive data, very often on legacy IT systems. Have you advised the British government of this? Well, we've been advising, of course, many sectors in many countries about the need to run.
Why didn't the government listen to you?
Well, I think to be fair, I think there are complexities about the IT systems in the NHS that I'm not an expert to talk about. But it sends a very clear message, Robert, I think, that all sectors are vulnerable. All sectors should take absolutely seriously the need to run updated systems and to patch when they can do that. You know, the story of the banking sector is very instructive here. Very few banks, if any, in Europe have been affected by this, and that's because they've learned through painful experience about being the #1 target for cybercrime, the value of having a proper strategy in place. And I think the health sector and others should follow the example of some others to make sure that now they sit up and take notice of what is absolutely a huge strategic concern.
Can I ask a question which is obviously a big concern to everybody? Do we think this is a criminal gang or person trying to make money, or is it possible this is politically motivated?
Well, we don't know that, Robert. Normally, in all the ransomware that we've seen so far, it's criminal-minded. Of course, there are amounts that are being demanded in this case, relatively small amounts, $300 rising to $600 if you don't pay within 3 days. Remarkably few payments so far that we've noticed as we're tracking it. So most people are not paying this. So ain't a lot of money being made by this, by criminal organisations so far.
So it could be, that could be a cover. This could be an anarchist group or a terrorist group.
Well, I don't want to think about different conspiracy theories here. We don't know what the motivation. Normally, it's criminally minded, and that's our first working theory for obvious reasons.
How hard is it to track? You know, given the dark web and all of that, how confident are you you'll be able to catch those responsible? Well,
what we are seeing increasingly is a cybercrime scene that is going underground. It's very difficult for us to identify the offender, let alone his or her location. We're in a very difficult fight against these ever more sophisticated cybercrime syndicates that are using encryption, amongst others, to hide their activity. But that's why we have this international response through institutions like Europol. And I should say on ransomware, you know, we've stood up a wonderful project with 76 partners now in the private industry as well, that allows people to come to our website and download free decrypts of most of the ransomware that is out there. Once we get to the bottom of this one, we'll make sure that this is available to people as well. But at the moment, we're in the face of an escalating threat. The numbers are going up. I'm worried about how the numbers will continue to grow when people go to work and turn the machines on Monday morning.
Now, I noted your plug for Europol presumably implies you want the Britain to remain a member after we leave the EU. Thank you so much for coming today, and hope to see you again
Thank you very much,
soon. I've just got a couple of minutes to chew over what we've just heard. Are you reassured by listening to the head of Europol that we are able to protect ourselves against these sorts of terrifying attacks?
Well, I'm very impressed with the work that Rob and Europol do, but I did pick up that he said there were concerns about the cybersecurity issues related to the NHS, and that does reinforce the point that I've been making, that the budgets for IT and infrastructure have been cut. And as I say, I'm announcing today that a Labour government will put 10 billion into into the infrastructure. Don't be so cheeky. We will put 10 billion into the infrastructure of the NHS, and I'm announcing that today.
Nadine, Rob Wainwright did say that they had concerns about the vulnerability of healthcare systems, including our own, and that he'd been relaying that to governments. We didn't listen, did we?
Well, I don't know, Rob, because I'm not in government. I think what Rob actually said was that he's very concerned about what happens on Monday morning globally when people sit down and switch on their computers. And as he also said, this is a growing worldwide problem with many public services across the world being affected by this. This is not, I know because we're the British media, that we're focusing on the NHS, and it's very convenient politically to do so. This is a global problem. It's a criminal global problem.
I mean, does that mean that we've just got to sort of roll over and say there's nothing we can do?
No, it doesn't. As I said, you know, there are 2 points I'd like to make, actually. One is that we are putting, and this isn't a Diane Abbott figure, this is a Theresa May figure, we are putting in Amber Road £1.9 billion. We have £1.9 billion. They blew £10 billion when they were in government on a failed IT system.
But we are putting £1 billion in the NHS.
£1.9 billion into cybersecurity. That's already gone in. I'm sure there'll be a review going forward on that. But I am terribly glad, Rob,
in your manifesto, but do you want to see Theresa May, when she announces your manifesto, putting more money than she's currently promising into the health service?
Well, I am sure that this problem will be considered and that may happen. But one thing I am really relieved about is that when we have a crisis like this, in a situation like this, that it is actually Theresa May who is running the country and not Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott. Because this is one point when we do need a strong and stable government.
We're talking about Jeremy's. Where's Jeremy Hunt? Where's my opposite number? We've not seen him anywhere.
He was
not a dicky bird from Jeremy Hunt.
It is certainly quite interesting we haven't seen Jeremy Hunt. Anyway, that's all we have time for. Thanks to Rob, David, Nicola, Nadine and John. Gosh, that was gripping and exhausting. See you all next week.